Hello and welcome to the Rotoworld Baseball Show. I'm your host, Eric Samulski, joined, as always, by my co-host, Scott Pianowski. We're going to keep the intros brief today, Scott. We got a lot to cover in a short amount of time, but how you doing?
Doing great and looking forward to talking some baseball.
Yeah, so the focus of today's show, we are right up against the All-Star break. Scott and I are going to look at just, again, some news and notes. We're going to rank the streamers for the weekend at the end of the episode. And in the middle, we're going to talk about how to determine if it is feasible for you to go for your league title or not. Looking at the standings right now, how do you determine should you make a move for it? And then if you have determined you have a shot, what are the next steps? What do you do? How do you go about trying to make the right moves to win your league? So hopefully we'll cover both some strategies, but also some players that could help you as you try to make that run. I guess the big news for the day is Tyler Glasnow going on the IL last night with lower back discomfort. You can tell me if I'm just a cynic here, Scott, but I know we were coming up against like Glasnow innings limits, and now we have his back felt a little tight the last time he threw, so we're going to put him on the IL. To me, it seems like the perfect way heading into the All-Star break to get him to miss one or two starts and keep the innings limit in check. But I don't believe this is anything to worry about. Maybe I'm just being cynical.
No, I think we're on the same page here. I mean, he allowed 5 runs, 5 earned runs or more in 3 of his last 5 starts. I mean, we know he's never thrown more than 120 innings at the major league level in any season. He's already 109 right now. When you drafted Glasnow, if anybody told you were going to get 160 to 180 innings, you would have jumped up and down. For the most part, he's been great. He was probably near the top of the Cy Young contention list until this recent downturn. The Dodgers are already in the playoffs. It's just a classic case of, okay, let's do some load management. Let's get him healthy. Let's get him right. And I still think Glasnow has somewhere between like 11 to 13 really good starts to give us in the second half.
Yeah. So we're agreed that we're not worrying there, but are we worrying about the other Dodgers starter, Bobby Miller, who was lit up again last night by the Phillies? Since over his last 6 starts, he's allowed 26 earned runs in 23 innings. He's walked 17, struck out 16. The results are not there. The fastball velocity is down a little bit. It was down almost 1.5 miles an hour last night, but it's still good velocity. The pitch shapes all look pretty good and grade out above average. His command, even now, is still grading out average to above average. Nothing screams that like he's not good. Is he maybe still hurt? Like, what do you do? And if you have Bobby Miller on your fantasy team, what can you do right now?
I mean, you have 2 choices. You cut him or you bench him. You can't start him. The walk rate has been awful. He's got a home run problem. And I know a lot of people will look at any pitcher and say, oh, well, he's allowed a lot of home runs. He's got an unlucky home run to fly ball rate. But sometimes it's just a matter of throwing meatballs and the batters get paid too, and they hit him out of the park. I am actually not confident that Bobby Miller figures this out, but he could. I mean, he was, last year he was one of their best starters until the playoffs when he got lit up. But I'm just concerned that the walk rate, the home run rate, the fact that it's been so long since he's not giving us length either, right? Even when he's pitching okay, it's like a 5 and a third inning start. So my expectations are very low for Miller in the short term. Obviously, he got a great career ahead of him. He's still just 25, but I don't trust him right now. And it would take multiple good starts for him to get back in my circle of trust.
I understand that. I would not be cutting him because I think the upside is legitimate. I at least want to see what happens when he gets extended rest over the All-Star break and seeing if that could help a little bit. Maybe can, work on refining some things in the bullpen. I am optimistic because the pitch shapes and the grades of the individual pitches don't look meaningfully different, which tells me that there might not be like a glaring issue here. My concern is that he's not fully healthy. But again, if he comes out of the All-Star break and he's got extended rest and he still isn't pitching well, then I think that we might be looking at a situation where it's like it might not happen this year and maybe he gets a small procedure in the offseason. Who really knows? I just can't cut him right now, especially since it's not like you are desperate for starting pitching next week, right? Because we don't have a full week of games. I would try to hold through the All-Star break, see what a start or two look like after the All-Star break, and make a decision from there, rather than cut somebody who has top 20 starting pitcher upside at this point in the season. So, maybe I'm being overly optimistic there, but I would exercise a little bit of caution, but I agree with you that I'm not starting him right now. There's a rumor today out of Pittsburgh that the Pirates are working to push a deal over the line to acquire Taylor Ward from the Angels. Taylor Ward is under team control for 2 more years. The Angels have said they're not going to trade anybody who remains under team control beyond this year. But again, teams say that oftentimes to drive up the cost or to make teams work harder. The word out of Pittsburgh is that this is close. By no means a sure thing, and it might, by the time you listen to this, be totally off. But theoretically speaking, Taylor Ward goes to Pittsburgh. Is this a lateral move for you? Would this be an upgrade for you? How would you be reacting to this?
I think the lineup's a little bit better, only because the Angels just have nothing going on right now. And Ward has been a sneaky good player for like 3 or 4 years now. His OPS plus has been over the league mean for 4 straight seasons. This year it's only 105, and it was 105 last year, but that's a good player. 14 home runs. I could see that park being good for him. 30 years old. He's kind of, we've hit what his peak probably is. This is the type of player he is, but I think he's a nice, just make accumulation addition. Just any good decision you make, if you can compound them, is logical to make, even if the Pirates aren't necessarily a contender this year. I can see Ward being a part of maybe a wild card team next year. I'd like to see the Angels. I know, and I agree with you, to have suspicion of, we're not trading anybody we have under control. They should listen to any phone call they get.
Right.
And I think Taylor Ward will be on a different team by the end of the month. It might be the Pirates. I mean, who knows? There are other contenders who could use a boost in the outfield. God knows the Yankees could use a hitter. I think the Braves could still use a hitter. The Dodgers are going to do something. We'll see what they do. They have moving parts in their offense. He's going to be on a different team. It was just, to me, the surprise was that the Pirates were the team that was calling, but Taylor Ward's a plus offensive player. He would fit on a bunch of teams, and I think the Angels, and yet he's not a cornerstone for the Angels either. So it seems to be a win-win for both teams, and I think a trade will happen, and I would like Ward a little bit more on an offense that could give him a little bit more buoyancy.
Yeah, and it would boost up some of the other guys in that lineup having more, RBI ability, run scoring ability. Listen, I know he has struggled. He's hitting 180 since June 1st, but over that same time frame, he has a near 15% barrel rate. That's top 40 in all of baseball, and just a 10.3% swinging strike rate. I really think he's getting a little bit unlucky. Somebody who's squaring the ball up that much, swinging and missing that little, and hitting just 180, it doesn't really add up. And again, we've talked about this with other players before. If you are continuously on a team, even if you're not the guy like a Mike Trout or a Shohei Ohtani, but you're on a team that starts every year with reasonable expectations for playoff contention, and then you fail to make the playoffs, it's draining. I can imagine that some of poor production might be a guy in the middle of another season where his team is going nowhere, and he's in the prime of his career, athletically speaking, and is just probably like maybe a little bit, not like checked out, but like some of these guys, like it's a grind, a long season, and it can be really tough when you're on a team that's not performing. But I'm curious to see how this plays out. It would be good for Taylor Ward. It might mean more opportunities for Jordan Adams, who's currently in AAA for the Angels, who's more of a speed upside play than anything, but certainly a situation to monitor. Ken Rosenthal has come out and said that Jazz Chisholm will be traded. We'll talk about this, on our trade deadline episodes as we get closer, but certainly a name to consider here for a lot of teams. The Marlins are going to look to capitalize on him being healthy for the first time in maybe a long time. And they're going to look to move him now while his value is at its highest. And, who knows who fills in for them. They could call up Troy Johnston and let Jesus Sanchez play some center. They could call up Victor Mesa Jr., who's, hitting fine in AAA, not great. I don't know that anything would be actionable here other than, depending on where Jazz goes, better lineup. Maybe he goes back to the middle infield. letting him play second base for the Yankees could be interesting. Who knows where it all plays out there.
Yeah, a little disappointed that in the mid-20s for Chisholm, he's just plateaued so much. I mean, he had that 138 OPS plus back in 2022, his all-star season. He's been just basically league average offensive player since then. And his baseball savant page is just, it's so meh, right? I mean, he doesn't hit the ball that hard. He doesn't have great command of the strike zone. I feel like this is a better athlete than he is a baseball player. Now, he's good for fantasy. 11 home runs, 18 stolen bases. That will always play. And it's just nice to see him healthy after he's had so many partial seasons in his career. But I thought by now Jazz Chisholm had a chance to be like a star, like a really signature player. I don't feel that way about him anymore. I think he's, first of all, better fantasy player than he is a real life player because of that category juice. But I'm disappointed that we haven't seen improvements in some of his skills because I feel like he's kind of flatlined.
Yeah, I agree there. I think that the idea that, you don't want to say athlete over baseball player, I think that's overly simplistic, but I think the athletic skills are going to carry him more in fantasy than plate discipline, contact rates, things like that. But again, as you said, this is a fantasy game and that will play in fantasy. The last little trade deadline or trade news piece, the Blue Jays have come out today and said they will not trade anybody who is under contract for next year. Now, again, we talked before that could all just be a smokescreen, but, we have all been talking about Bo Bichette and Vlad Jr. and all of that. And if you are making fantasy decisions hoping that some of those guys find a new home, it might not be the case. You might be looking at a lot of, bullpen assets on the move for the Blue Jays, guys on one-year deals. Maybe somebody wants to take on a Justin Turner or something like that. But we might not see like the full rebuild that people were talking about.
I mean, it's going to happen at some point. It just may not happen this summer. I think a lot of teams feel like their mileage is better in the offseason when they're not distracted by the games actually going on and they can settle in and maybe field offers at a more gradual pace. It's not, the immediacy doesn't kind of overwhelm them with an emotional moment, but still, Toronto's going to listen to every phone call they get. They're not going anywhere this year. They realize that. They have, maybe it's like a Chris Bassett they trade, right? I mean, a pitcher mid-30s still could be somebody who could start a playoff game for, as a number 2, number 3 guy, something like that. But he's not going to be part probably of the next good Toronto team. Mm-hmm. And I think eventually they're going to just say, okay, Bo Bichette needs to be on a different team. They're not going to give him away by any means. And I still keep waiting for Bo Bichette to like rattle off like a 13 for 29 stretch or something like that. And I can relax and say, oh, he's fine. And, I'm still waiting for Vladimir Guerrero to hit the ball in the air as much as I want him to. I feel like he should have been like in MVP contention more than just that one great season. Mm-hmm. Obviously the park hasn't played the way we wanted. I still think they're going to trade some guys. It's just maybe the big Toronto blow up isn't going to happen until after the season.
Yeah, I think Bo Bichette would do for an approach change, and maybe a new organization would help with his approach. And we'll see. But yeah, I agree with you. I think change is imminent. It's just whether it's this year, next year, who knows. We'll hit some quick hitters before we get into the crux of our show for the day. From a larger baseball news standpoint, Wander Franco was officially charged in the Dominican Republic with sexual abuse, sexual exploitation of a minor, and also now they added a charge of human trafficking. Faces up to 20 years in prison. This is a fantasy show from a fantasy perspective. If you were thinking that Wander Franco may be back in your baseball life this year, next year, whatever, I would just free yourself of those thoughts. I don't think that he's coming back to Major League Baseball, possibly ever, at least anytime soon. Yesterday, Zach Wheeler left the game with a back injury. The Phillies were already up 9-1 heading into the 6th inning when Wheeler came out of the game. Wheeler has said he's fine and hopes to pitch this weekend. I think even if the Phillies hold him out this weekend because they're playing against the Athletics, I think Wheeler's fine. He'll be back right after the All-Star break, and I wouldn't be too concerned about it. Both Bryce Harper and Kyle Schwarber did return last night, so they are back in the lineup. AJ Smith-Shawver from the Braves was activated off the IL and was kept on the Major League roster in the bullpen. But it does give them like a 6th starting pitcher lurking on the Major League roster in case Reynaldo Lopez needs a break with his innings totals or Spencer Schwellenbach regresses a little bit. So again, a name to keep on the periphery of your radar. Blake Snell and Wilmer Flores were both activated from the IL for the Giants, so they are back. Eddie Rosario was called up from the minor leagues by the Braves and has been in the starting lineup pretty much every day while Ramon Laureano is out. And Adam Duvall is also not playing well. Eddie Rosario is a starting outfielder for the Braves again. Matt Wallner, we talked about earlier in the week, was called up. However, he has been in the starting lineup all 3 of the games that he has been up. So Matt Wallner is potentially looking at a strong side platoon role again, or at least the Twins are trying to give him that role. So that matters for playing time purposes. Today, Tommy Edman will finally play the field during his rehab stint as he gets closer to returning. We've talked a little bit about the chaos that will bring to the Cardinals fielding lineup, but again, he's still a little bit away, but this will be a big step for Tommy Edman. Mike Clevenger threw 61 pitches in his last rehab start. The White Sox said they're going to see how he rebounds and that they're open to, quote, building him up on the fly, which would mean making him make shorter starts in the big league rotation rather than have him be fully built up before they call him up. Again, he's likely to take the starting spot of either Jonathan Cannon or Drew Thorpe, depending on how that plays out. And Jason Dominguez of the Yankees has started doing baseball activities at the Yankees complex as he recovers from an oblique injury. He's been fielding and throwing. He hasn't yet been hitting. I don't know how long Jason Dominguez will be out for. They said like early August, mid-August, if all goes well, depending on how Giancarlo Stanton recovers. We may get Jason Dominguez with a little bit of a starting role for the Yankees in August, which could be interesting. But again, that's a few weeks away. So anything you want to touch on here, Scott?
Just a couple of things. Also, Thairo Estrada also came back for the Giants. He's had a disappointing year, but maybe he'll do something, and you can understand why they traded Austin Slater, where they knew they're getting these reinforcements back. I don't know what it would take for me to trust Blake Snell. He's been so just ineffective when he's pitched. He's been dinged up. We know he's had that odd career where he's got the 2 Cy Young wins, but the other seasons have been really kind of all over the place. So Blake Snell is not anywhere near my circle of trust. And you mentioned Clevenger coming back. They better not take Drew Thorpe out of the rotation. That will really frustrate me if that happens.
I think it's Cannon. I mean, Flexen would be another option, but again, like his name never comes up in this discussion of people who might be removed from the rotation. So I don't know if they would. I kind of am intrigued by Jonathan Cannon. It would be sad if it was him, but I think it is him. And I'm glad you brought up Thairo Estrada. Thanks for that, because I do think like if he's healthy, I think he could be an interesting player in the second half of the season. So curious how he looks coming back from that injury. We're going to get to our discussion on how to know if you should take a shot at your league title. But before we do that, the LPGA's top golfers head to France as the 4th major of their season tees off on the shores of Lake Geneva. Nelly Korda, Minji Lee, Celine Boutelier headline the field at Amundi Evian Championship Thursday through Sunday on the Golf Channel and Peacock. So make sure you check that out. Scott, we both have been playing fantasy baseball for a long, long time. We are now at the stage in the season where you should have already started checking your standings. You should have already started checking your standings more directly than just like, am I close to the top? But like, what categories am I good in? Where can I improve? Where can I not? You should know right now if you have a legitimate shot of making a run at your league title. Let's stick to redraft formats right now, because obviously if we did keeper and dynasty, we could talk about a myriad of different strategies. How do you know in a redraft league if you have a legitimate shot to take the crown in a given year? And how do you go about making the steps to like put your best foot forward to take that run?
It comes down to 2 things. For one, I think you need to be at least in the middle of the standings right now. Somewhere there's one 12-team mixed league that I'm in. I'm in 6th place. I think I'm inside the cutoff that I could, if enough things went right, could think about cashing or winning that league. But it comes down to a very extensive category audit of where am I built up for surplus? What can I trade easily? What categories could I move up significantly with a moderate amount of help? And one of the most important things when it comes to trading is that you're trying to trade to improve your categorical shape. It doesn't, you don't have to make trades that necessarily win in a vacuum. If you're so far ahead in saves, you may be able to trade a closer for somebody who may not seem like enough for that closer, but if that's the best trade you can get and it helps you in, say, stolen bases where you can easily leapfrog 3 or 4 teams, that can make a lot of sense. Or sometimes you make trades that help an opponent that isn't competing with you, but it could actually hurt one of your competitors. So it's all about solving the puzzle. You get to spend a lot of time auditing what do the other teams have categorically, where are teams deep, where are teams shallow. People, it's like baseball cards. People don't want to trade their only Mike Trout or Shohei Ohtani card, but if they have multiple cards, maybe nobody wants to trade Ohtani at all. But if they have multiple Julio Rodriguez cards, it's easier to make a trade for one of those things. That's what fantasy baseball is like. If somebody is deep in a position and shallow in another position, they have motivation in that second category, and they have maybe easier to part with somebody in that first group. So it takes a lot of auditing. Also, if you're in a league where you've been with the same managers for a while, it comes down to some people like to trade, some people don't. It could be, is this a phone person? Is this a text person? Is this a message through the league software person? Right. Is this somebody you see socially? Maybe you see them for drinks on Thursday night. Maybe your kids are in the same little league or whatever. I mean, you just try to get an idea of when you can talk to somebody and what type of relationship you have with them and what's the best way to get to know them as far as their fantasy teams are concerned, and get them to talk, get them to try to reveal how they feel about things. You get them to rank things, get them to ask them what's gone right with their season, identify the best players on their team they don't want to trade because maybe that makes them feel comfortable trading some of those second tier, third tier players. It's all about getting to know the person that you're trying to trade with.
I like that. And I also like the comment, we're focusing here on categories and not overall players, right? Early in the season, you're like, oh, this guy has great upside. I'm going to add him off the waiver wire because if it breaks right, he's a really talented player. At this point in the season, it's like, if he's a really talented player, but he's a home run first guy and you're first in home runs, adding that player off the waiver wire doesn't necessarily really help you out, even if his quote unquote upside is higher. At this point in the season, I like to go team by team, look at the standings, look at each category, and say realistically, how many points can I gain, but also realistically, how many points can I lose, right? Where is the clump behind me in steals, right? If I'm first in steals, but I'm only 5 steals ahead of the person who's like 6th in steals, I could theoretically fall all the way down to 6th in steals if my team doesn't keep stealing bases. So don't just look at where you can gain, but look at where realistically you could lose points. And then from that point, can identify within each league, what is the category where the swing is the greatest, right? If I could gain 3 points in home runs, but I could also lose 5 points in home runs, that's an 8-point swing in the home run category for me. That might be the largest point swing in any category. So that may mean that home runs is the category I really need to focus on, because even if I'm only gaining 3 points, if I'm also protecting a 5-point lead, then that I think I could feasibly lose, that's still, in a sense, quote unquote, gaining that. Like, I'm not losing that. So it helps within the standings. So I think really doing, as you said, that kind of audit is really important. And again, we'd say this all before, but like just making sure that the category need you're going after is not just like, hey, I want homers. This guy has Matt Olson. I want to trade for Matt Olson. If that owner also needs homers for their league, like that's probably not the conversation you want to have. Look for the fantasy manager who also could afford to give up home runs, or maybe is so far down in home runs that they would be willing to give up their best home run hitter because it doesn't move the needle for them.
Your time will be spent a lot better if you actually see the trade from the other person's viewpoint before you even talk to them. And again, as you said, maybe the Olsen manager, maybe that Olsen's his only cornerman, right? Not only would he miss Olsen, but he wouldn't have anybody to replace him with. And maybe the waiver wire is very barren at that position. One other thing, and I realize this isn't every league, but some people play in leagues where there's a start cap for the season, starting pitchers maximum, or there's an innings pitch maximum. So look, that's a great way to incentivize a trade where you look in your league. Okay, this guy is on pace to shoot past the innings pitch maximum by 150 innings. At some point, these players literally won't accrue any more stats for those guys for that season. So there are people incentivized to make a trade because they literally, at some point, Zach Wheeler's not going to count for them anymore. So you can go to them and say, look, great pitching staff. You're going to hit the innings cap on September 3rd. You might want to get out ahead of this and maybe trade for one of my hitters and go into it. I always say this, and we've said it on previous podcasts, and I know Fred Zinke, who's my colleague at Yahoo, does a great job with trading. Act like you're going to make 10 trades with this person. You're not trying to ambush people and get a reputation. And if you may win a trade, you may win in the short term and lose in the long term. You win the battle, you lose the war type of thing. Look at this as a long-term relationship.
Yeah. And if you're in a league that doesn't do trading, like an NFBC format, you have to be comfortable dropping a player who has value and would be traded for if that player doesn't help your team. So, for example, you may reach a point where you're pretty rock solid in saves. Maybe you have two good closers, maybe you have three good closers. You don't really need three good closers. You're sitting up high enough in the standings with saves that maybe you just want to keep one or two of those guys to keep accruing a couple to maintain a lead. And so that may mean you drop somebody who's a fringe, who can maybe save 7-8 games in August and September. That's not nothing, but if that doesn't help you, then you need to be okay moving on from that player. So also guys like, speed first guys, like a David Hamilton type. We've seen David Hamilton now. His playing time is a little more sporadic than it was before. He's not hitting for the batting average we saw before. Maybe Vaughn Grissom comes back in the second half of the year. In a trading league, somebody would trade for David Hamilton. He still has value. In a non-trading league, if you're good in stolen bases, you may just want to say, I'm just going to cut David Hamilton because I don't need his steals. And that's really the only thing of tremendous value that he's consistently giving me. And I see the opportunity to add somebody who's giving me power that I really need. It's okay to say I'm cutting somebody who I know has value because they don't have as much value to me. And that's the important part, is what is their value to you from here on out?
That's such a great point. And it underscores two things that I commonly say. One, if you never cut a player who goes on to get picked up by somebody else, maybe help another team, or maybe even just be a regretful player you cut. If you never do that in the course of a season, you're playing far too conservatively. It's almost like the poker player who never gets caught bluffing. And also this underscores, and I think this even gets deeper and deeper as we go through the season, you have to audit the players who are getting cut, because what's going to happen, you see this in every fantasy football season where people draft their teams, they love their teams, and then players start getting hurt, then the bye weeks kick in, and all of a sudden people are like, oh crap, I'm not going to make the playoffs, and I have to cut this guy because he's hurt or he doesn't play in week 6 or something like that. They make cuts they don't want to. People in your league, and they're going to make reasonable cuts because they don't, especially in those NFBC formats where a player doesn't make sense for them right now. They can't hold on to them much longer. They can't make a trade in that format. So they're going to make a cut, and they're maybe hoping you're not paying attention. They're going to pick up that guy in 2 or 3 weeks when it makes sense again. So it's just paramount. It doesn't take that long. Just look at everybody who's cut. I know a lot of players are going to have no value to anybody in your league, but there's going to be a few guys you're going to go, aha. And nothing stings more, Eric, than when I see a player picked up who I didn't realize was cut, who I would have had interest in. I'm like, oh my God, why? And you think, well, they must have had a good reason for cutting them. I wish I had noticed. Or just even last week where I didn't notice Lee in Minnesota was available in my NFBC league, and he went for a very modest,
very reasonable offer.
Yeah, very reasonable offer. And I'm like, geez, I know I could have topped that, but I just didn't notice it. And that's a very painful thing to recognize. So make sure you're giving, it doesn't take long. Just make sure you audit everybody who's dropped. And I get 90% of those players may not be of interest to you, but that center cut of it is actually guys you may be bidding on the next week.
It's great advice, and it's something, I talked to Jenny Butler, who's a great player and also just a great in terms of organization prior to the season, and she, gave me some tips on how she organizes her, teams each week. I've been doing that and keeping track of hey, Jared Jones was dropped in one of my NFBC leagues where I'm in a decent spot in the standings and I don't have any injured players on my bench. So the person who had Jared Jones had other injured players, needed production now. I can probably wait a couple, even if it's 3 weeks, 4 weeks for him to come back. I can feel like I'm in a position to wait. I see that now. I could try to jump early before there's any sort of news that he's going to come back or whatever. You need to see this, and being able to track it week to week. You could say, wait, 2 weeks ago I noticed so and so was out there. Also, they weren't picked up again. I also audit players who I have in my like waterfalls, so to speak, who don't get claimed. I make sure I mark it, because if I thought they were good enough to pick up last week, I may think they're good enough to pick up this week. They weren't claimed. Maybe I can get back in on it if they continue to produce. So those are a couple good strategies. Let's talk about some players who could fit into this. So this is an inexact science, but I just thought it was an interesting way to look at this. We're going to take this more from a component of, we've been doing a lot of waiver wire talk. We do waiver wire talk every Monday. I wanted to look at this more from like a trade standpoint. So if you are in a non-trade league, I apologize. A lot of the guys we're going to talk about are obviously not available on waivers. And you can move to the end if you feel like, when we're going to rank our streamers. But I took the projections for rest of the season in all the categories and said, okay, if you need if you need home runs, here are 4 guys who are near the top of the Bat X's rest of season projections for home runs. Who would you feel most interested in trying to go out and trade for? I tried to make them guys who a team's fantasy manager would reasonably want to trade, right? Like, Aaron Judge at the top of projected home run leaders. You're not going to go out and trade for Aaron Judge. The person who has Aaron Judge isn't looking to trade Aaron Judge. But 4 guys near the top of the home run rest of season projections are Luis Robert with 13 home runs projected, Adolis Garcia at 13 projected home runs, Jake Berger at 13 projected home runs, and Christopher Morel at 12 projected home runs. If you were trying to add power, which of those 4 guys interest you the most to try to go out and get in your fantasy leagues?
Yeah, Garcia and Morel jump out to me. Garcia's had some injury stops and starts. I still believe, even though I think Texas will tear it down on the pitching side, I still believe in their offense. And we know a healthy Garcia in a full season would be like a 35 home run player. Christopher Morel has just been so unlucky in all the StatCast data. And I know, some people trust that stuff more than others, but I got to feel like Christopher Morel has some positive regression coming his way. I still don't think the Cubs have a bad lineup. Now, their relief staff is something else. It's just been horrible. Maybe the worst bullpen they've had in 25 years. Much of the angst of Sarah Sanchez, who's at the ballpark almost every day and wondering how they're going to blow this game. But Christopher Morel has been one of those buy lows for me all season, and I think Adolis Garcia, you're not going to get him for nothing or anything like that. But I think you could get him maybe for 85 or 90% of what his true value is.
Yeah, I've always had a little bit of concern about the plate discipline for Morel and Adolis Garcia. So I'd probably lean more toward Garcia, because again, like, he has proven me wrong for 3 years in a row. And so, yes, the plate discipline is a little bit of a concern still, but we know he can manage that. I think Luis Robert is a prime trade candidate too. So I would be interested in trying to make a move for him, hoping that he locks into, maybe he gets moved to a team where the lineup is better around him. And so I'm curious about that as well. Again, I think he's probably the highest. Well, Adolis Garcia was probably the earliest drafted, and then Robert after him. So I still think it's going to take a pretty penny. And then Berger for me is somebody where, like, Jake Berger is arbitration eligible for 4 more years at a low cost. I don't think the Marlins are moving him. They have no incentive to move him. I don't know that I really want to trade for somebody who is a power first player on a bad lineup who's having a bad year right now. So I probably would not be super interested in Berger unless it was like a very low cost move for me.
I'll admit part of my reluctance with Robert is just things never seem to work out for the White Sox. They have so much trouble keeping their major talent healthy, and it looked like a team. They looked almost set up like the Orioles are set up now, where it's like, oh my God, this team is so young and so talented, and it's going to be a monster in a couple of years, and that just never came to fruition with the White Sox. So maybe and granted, Robert was great last year when he did get in close to a full season, but I think that maybe clouds my skepticism on him perhaps more than I should.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. You're going to have some skepticism in the next group too. We look at RBIs. near the top of projected RBI leaders from here on out. Josh Naylor, 43 projected RBIs. Nolan Arenado, 41 projected RBIs. Paul Goldschmidt, 37 projected RBIs. Bo Bichette, 36 projected RBIs. Would you try to make a move for any of these guys?
Man, Naylor, I guess, would be the first guy. The older Cardinals just make me so nervous, and obviously Bichette has been almost like a weekly puzzle that we tried to figure out. So Naylor was the name that percolated to the top of the list, but there's nobody I'm pounding the table for.
Yeah, Naylor for me too. The batting average has been around like 241, 247, expected batting average of 276, making good quality contact. I think the batting average will pick up. He might be hard to trade for because the home runs and the RBIs have been really, really good this year in that Cleveland lineup. So he's providing a lot of fantasy value, even though the batting average hasn't been great. But I think the batting average could be better, which is why I'm willing to quote unquote buy high. And Paul Goldschmidt, actually, I'm interested in. I used my custom StatCast leaderboard from June 1st on. He's hitting just 239 with 5 home runs in 150 plate appearances from June 1st on. But that come with a 14.3% barrel rate and just a 10.3% swinging strike rate, 24% strikeout rate. But a guy who's making strong quality of contact. Maybe, Jordan Walker comes up for the Cardinals. Maybe Tommy Edman has a good second half. Maybe Lars Nootbaar has a good second half. Maybe this lineup gets a little bit of a boost, and Goldschmidt can have a couple more RBIs while consistently hitting in the middle of that order. So Goldschmidt, I'd be interested in taking a flyer on too if I was able to get him for a reasonable cost and needed some RBIs. Runs. Let's go with another middle infield kind of disappointment to start the year. Marcus Semien, near the top of the projected runs leaderboard, 43 runs projected from here to the end of the year. Dansby Swanson, 38 projected runs. Yandy Diaz, 38 projected runs. Randy Arozarena, 38 projected runs. If you needed runs, which is maybe the most overlooked category in fantasy baseball, which of these guys would you be most looking to acquire?
Yeah, I love guys who score runs. It usually means they're in a decent lineup. They're in a decent lineup slot. And Marcus Semien, who recently had a day off, and he actually came back from that day off. He usually wants to play every game of every season. Refreshed. He's been hitting pretty well the last couple of days. I still like that Texas lineup. I don't see any reason why they can't be a top 10 lineup, even if the pitching gets traded or isn't reliable. So Marcus Semien gets my vote of confidence. And I'll even give you a lesser name who's not on this list. We talked about him, I think, in passing on Monday. Colt Keith has become the regular number 2 hitter in Detroit. I know Tigers lineup is probably below average right now, but remember they bought out his arbitration years. He's over the last couple of weeks, I think he's hitting 300. He's stealing the occasional base. He's got some power. I could easily see Colt Keith scoring something close to these run projections you have. I think Colt Keith might have 35 runs in him the rest of the way.
Yeah, Colt Keith, Jonathan India is another one. He's been leading off for the Reds. Even when TJ Friedel comes back, I don't know that you move India out of the leadoff spot if he's continued to hit that way. I really like those options. And I would also buy high on somebody like Stephen Kwan. I think huge guys who are batting average assets and whose best category is their batting average. Mm-hmm. Sometimes we don't think of them as like a buy high, right? Because their stats aren't as loud as somebody who's hit like 20 homers. So I don't think fantasy managers maybe value them as accurately or appropriately as they should. Also, Kwan has not been running as much as he has in years past. And so there could be some concern that you're not going to get the stolen base totals that you've gotten in the past. But I think Kwan is a great batting average asset, hitting atop a really good lineup. And so if I needed runs, I'm super happy to buy high on Stephen Kwan, which would also help me in batting average. And then if he starts running again, also potentially speed. So I would be trying to acquire him as well.
I love Stephen Kwan. For all the talk the last few years of Luis Suarez, he's going to hit 350, 360s. He's a throwback player. Kwan is more likely to draw a walk. He's a better base runner. He's just a better baseball player. He's also a terrific fielder where they're finding out in San Diego that Arise really doesn't have a good position. I think Kwan's one of the most underrated players in baseball. I would love to get him anywhere. And so what?
Yeah.
His approach is different. I see he wants to put the ball in play, and sometimes he's just slapping the ball to left field. I get it. So he's not a launch handling guy. He's not a hard hit. He's not an exit velocity guy. But so what? He's an effective offensive player, and he's done it for 3 years. He's established himself as a very good, I mean, he's on the All-Star team this year, and he should be. And he kind of suits that Cleveland lineup too, right? A lot of OBP guys. Jose Ramirez is back in the MVP discussion, and this is the best team in the American League Central, and right now I think they have the best record in the American League. So you're in Kwan, you'd be getting the guy at the front of a lineup that's outperformed expectations as well.
Yeah, I agree with that. Again, we talked about helping your batting average, that he would help your batting average. Some other guys that would potentially help your batting average, projected batting average from here on out. Yandy Diaz, 288. Masataka Yoshida, 287. Michael Harris, 286. Gabriel Moreno, 281. Trading 4 catchers tends to be harder to do, and not a lot of people are like actively trying to go out and get a catcher. Maybe Moreno could be somebody if you needed batting average. Any of these 4 guys stand out to you if you needed to improve your batting average to help win your league?
I mean, Moreno's widely available in Yahoo too. I think he's only about 42% roster at the moment. I bet you get Yoshida pretty cheaply, and Harris. The Harris manager is probably frustrated because he got off to such a poor start. Then he got hurt. The team overall has not hit. So I think those guys could probably be I like everybody in this list, but I think Moreno you could probably pick up in some leagues, and I think Harris and Yoshida could be traded under market from a manager. Yoshida just got a decent contract. He's been overshadowed by other guys in that Boston lineup. He's been hurt part of this year, but he's still got an offensive game and an approach that really fits that park very well.
Yeah, I fully agree on that. And he's not playing against lefties, which kind of dings him a little bit in terms of playing time and how much that batting average helps. For me, the big red light is blinking and shining over Michael Harris. I was big on him coming into the year. I think just maybe try to take advantage of depressed value, as you mentioned, with the slow start and the injuries. This is a guy who, like many people, thought of as a top 3 round pick. So even if you're giving way above his current production, you could still wind up coming out on top if he comes back and produces at anything close to the rate that he was producing at before. So I love the idea of trying to get in on Michael Harris, especially at a time like now when he still is not imminently returning. So the person who has Michael Harris may say, like, I don't know if I can wait 2 more weeks. I don't like, what if there's a setback, right? You can make that move for Michael Harris. Stolen bases. Some interesting names here. Again, keeping in mind that we're just looking for stolen bases from these guys. Projected stolen base leaders second half of the year. We got Corbin Carroll, 19 rest of season projected stolen bases. Jacob Young with the Nationals, 15 projected rest of season stolen bases. Nico Horner, 14. And Jose Caballero, 14 projected rest of season stolen bases. If you needed steals, who would you be looking for to make a trade for?
Man, I'm glad Corbin Carroll's doing something, because he's not doing much of anything else. I'd still be afraid to trade for him. A lot of times stolen bases come from the ethos of a team. You mentioned Jacob Young. That could also be Luis Garcia. That could also be Lane Thomas. I like to trade for a guy who's on a team who says, yeah, run whenever you want. Washington around 500. They've been a more fun fantasy team than maybe their overall record suggests they should be. And I think a lot of people in this lineup would make a lot of sense. We also talked about Leotis Taveras on the show on Monday, who last year was a 14-14 guy. This year he already has double-digit stolen bases. He has enough defensive chops to stay in the lineup. And I still think the Texas isn't going anywhere, but it's not going to be the fault of the lineup, even though he's usually at the bottom third. He's not going to displace Simeon or Seager at the top of the lineup, but he's be a player I'd like to get. I just want to say that I just can't trade for Corbin Carroll because I don't trust that the shoulder's right. Now, it's interesting. If his shoulder was bad, why would he be stealing bases? That doesn't really add up. And they haven't said that he's hurt, but all of his power metrics and his slugging metrics and his batted ball profile suggest that he's not playing at 100%. So Carroll makes me nervous. I would try to get one of the Washington Nationals.
Yeah, I like the idea of talking about Jacob Young. He's going to play pretty much every day still. And again, you're looking for just speed. I like the idea of potentially adding Nico Horner. His name has come up in trade rumors. And so I think that if he were to get traded to a team that is more apt to run, that could really help his fantasy value in terms of stolen bases. On the Fangraphs leaderboard that I was talking about, Nico Horner is tied for 15th in baseball from June 1st on, with just a 5.4% swinging strike rate. This is a guy who's not making a lot of barrel contact, but is still making tons of contact. And speed first batting average guys who make tons of contact, I think, have a tendency to be able to produce that kind of high floor batting average. I think the batting average will tick up for him. So that would be a gamble on him finding a new home where he could run. And then a name I don't have on this list, but from June 1st on, Maikel Garcia is tied for 9th in baseball with 8 stolen bases while hitting just 157 over that span. So not even getting on base that much. But again, that comes with just a 5% swinging strike rate, a 13.7% strikeout rate over that span. I think we're going to go back to seeing Maikel Garcia hit for a solid batting average. And if he's running that much when he's not on base often, if he hits like 250, 260 from here on out, and he was stealing 8 bases while hitting 150, I think Garcia is going to run even more. And so he's a guy who, because of his really cold stretch, I think you could probably get as a corner infield option in a lot of leagues if you needed help with stolen bases from here on.
It might give you a boost in runs scored because he's always going to bat and lead off. In Kansas City lineup, I'm not saying it's great 1 to 9, but like 1 to 5 is actually a pretty good lineup.
Yeah. We're going to talk about saves, and then we'll move on to ranking our streamers for the weekend, just so we can get this in the time frame we have today. Again, I looked at Steamer here. I kind of like using Steamer for pitching rest of season projections. And this will all change based on trade deadlines and all that sort of stuff. But I try to take guys who I thought could remain with their teams, or at least you could take the gamble they are. So David Bednar is projected for 13 saves the rest of the way. James MacArthur of the Royals is projected for 12. Jimmy Garcia, currently on the Blue Jays, is projected for 9 saves the rest of the way, or he gets traded. Or you could take save spec stashes on a guy like Hunter Harvey in case Cal Finnegan gets traded, Ben Joyce in case Carlos Estevez gets traded, Jose Leclerc, who we talked about on Monday. If you need saves, what is your preferred avenue here? Are you going to try to trade for one of those guys, or just stash a few of these potential guys and hope somebody gets a job?
I mean, it's easy to say this. It sounds convenient, but I'm always trying to get this category filled as cheaply as I can. Is Colin Holderman of interest if Bednar gets traded, if Aroldis Chapman gets traded? There seems like there's been cheap alternatives in Toronto to look at. And again, we talked about some people will be traded there. It may not be the biggest names, but relievers are always shopped at this time of year. And maybe Jose Leclerc, his control's been better of late. Texas, you would think, why hold on to Yates and Robertson the way they're pitching right now at the stage of their careers in their late 30s? It just doesn't make sense to hold guys like that. Another player, Dalton Del Don was mentioning him on the Yahoo video we did recently. Josh Hader has been really unlucky with save opportunities, and he had some mechanical problems that have since been ironed out. He's pitched a lot better of late. Sometimes it's a case of who's a closer on a team, who's the automatic 9th inning guy who just hasn't run. It's almost like a running back who hasn't been getting those goal line chances because the game flow it hasn't gone his way or whatever. Right. And just at some point, those touchdowns are just going to catch up and kind of equal out. I feel like Hader, and again, this was Dalton's angle. I'm totally taking it off his page, but I feel like Hader would be a good guy to trade for right now if you want to go at the high end of the market. But obviously, every time there's a trade at the trade deadline, you have to immediately just see who's the benefit here, who is stepping into playing time, and that is never more important than when the late inning relievers get moved, because immediately they have to have somebody has to step into that. And that's where you have to try to watch those games, see who's warming up, read between the lines. It isn't always the 8th inning guy who gets promoted. Sometimes those guys get traded too. But this is a very important area you need to study over the next few weeks, because there's going to be 3 or 4 freshly minted closers. We don't know who they are, but you want to try to be ahead of those guys.
And I like, if you're looking for just stashes, I do like Ben Joyce because I think Estevez is definitely going to get moved. And Joyce has been good on his own right now, which is useful. I'm okay to stash Kevin Ginkel. Paul Sewald has really struggled of late, so maybe Sewald moves into a role. And same thing, Shelby Miller. Jason Foley has really struggled of late. I don't know how many saves the Tigers are going to get, but Shelby Miller could be somebody of interest.
I don't.
As well.
Foley's been good to me. I don't trust him at all right now. And not only that, I don't think AJ Hinch trusts him right now. He's kind of looking for reasons not to use
but he
Foley.
shouldn't. Yeah,
No, he shouldn't.
He has really
probably.
struggled since May. We're going to rank our streamers to end this show. Before we do that, Travis Kelce and Patrick Mahomes go from hoisting the Lombardi Trophy to hitting the links as they compete at the American Century Championship. Catch the star-studded field in Lake Tahoe this weekend on Peacock, the Golf Channel, and NBC. Listen, I don't even know who else is in that field, but Kelce and Mahomes don't need to win anything else. So if somebody else could win that, that would be just splendid.
A little Kansas City Chiefs fatigue is kind of kicked in. I get it.
Yeah, for me, for sure. Especially as a Bills fan, I'm over it. We're going to go through this quickly. We got a little bit of time left. Thursday, my top 4 streamers. I tried to keep these under 50% rostered on Yahoo. Carson Spires of the Reds gets the Rockies. Albert Suarez of the Orioles gets the Cubs. Jake Bloss of the Astros gets the Marlins. And David Peterson of the Mets gets the Nationals. Who would you choose here, Scott?
Yeah, Suarez has just been so consistent, and he's on a team I believe in. And he was the first name that percolated, though I am a little bit of a sympathizer for David Peterson, too.
Yeah, I think Spires has been really interesting of late, and I don't like that Rockies offense on the road, even though they did pretty well last night. So Spires and Suarez are at the top for me, Peterson, and then Bloss would be afterwards, just because it's the Marlins, but not because of anything in particular that he's doing that interests me. Friday, we have Luis L. Ortiz of the Pirates against the White Sox, Jose Soriano of the Angels against the Mariners, Justin Robleski of the Dodgers against the Tigers, and Sean Manaea of the Mets against the Rockies. Where do you go here?
Man, Manaea's hurt me so many times, but Colorado on the road is always something you attack with confidence, and the offense has been playing better. At least they have Diaz back. I don't know that any other the Mets relievers are really trustable right now, but at least the 9th inning seems to be in good hands. So a weak vote to Manaea for me.
Luis L. Ortiz, top option for me. I wrote about him last week in mixing it up, so make sure you check that out on NBC Sports against the White Sox. That's my clear top option. Manaea is throwing the sweeper a lot more recently, so I would gamble on him as well. And then Justin Robleski looked interesting, even though the stat line wasn't there in that first start. Dodgers against the Tigers, good chance to steal a 5-inning win as well. So that is interesting for streaming. Saturday, you got Javier Assad from the Cubs against the Cardinals, Jonathan Cannon of the White Sox against the Pirates, James Paxton of the Dodgers against the Tigers, and Dallas Keuchel of the Brewers against the Nationals. It's a rough day, but where would you go here?
Not Keuchel for me, but Assad is fine. He's been pretty consistent all season, and Paxton against the Detroit lineup that not only is it not good 1 through 9, but the better hitters in this lineup seem to be the left-handed hitters. So at least Paxton is left-handed. He mitigates some of that, takes out some of Riley Green's effectiveness, or maybe even the surging Colt Keith's effectiveness. There's even a chance Keith may not start that game. So Assad would be my first pick, but I'd be fine with Paxton as well.
Yeah, I would throw Jonathan Cannon in there. I know it hasn't been great, but I do like what he's doing. I think Pittsburgh's offense is fine, but not great. There's not a really great chance of a win there, so I put him below like Paxton, I believe. But I do like Jonathan Cannon. I would definitely be interested in deeper leagues and playing him. And then Sunday, we have Jose Quintana against the Rockies, Quinn Priester of the Pirates against the White Sox, Cal Quantrill of the Rockies against the Mets, and Colin Ray of the Brewers against the Nationals. Where would you go here?
Yeah, the last I saw, Priester just has me spooked off him, but I'd be fine with any of the other 3. I know Quantrill wasn't great in his last start, but he usually goes 6, won't strike out a lot of guys, but he's efficient, economical, might have a chance at a win. Quintana has pitched better of late, and Colin Ray, there's some special sauce in Milwaukee. Maybe it's the fact that the defense has been so good this year, but people are out kicking what their peripherals suggest. And I think, again, it's a comment on the defense being better than we expected. Washington's offense is still a plus matchup, even though it's been more fantasy friendly because they steal so many bases. So I'm not going to use Priester. I could play with any of these other 3 guys.
I will say Priester last night against the Brewers, 6 innings, 4 hits, 1 earned run, 8 strikeouts as a bulk reliever. I could see Priester in like really deep formats because you're picking on the White Sox. But to me, Quintana and Quantrill are on another level here. Quintana's been really good of late. You get the Rockies on the road. He's my top choice. I would go Quantrill next. And then I would probably actually put Priester above Colin Ray, just based on what Priester looked like in the last start. And again, it being the White Sox. We're going to be back on Monday with more waiver wire discussion. And then we get DJ joining us on Wednesday. We're going to talk trade deadline, players who could be moved, players who could benefit. We're going to get into all of that speculative fun. So next week is a good week on the Rotoworld Baseball Show. Make sure you check us out there. Download, rate, and review this podcast. It helps us out. We will see you to talk more baseball next week.